At exactly 2:17 a.m., the house followed a routine I had never taught it. I was awake when it happened, not half asleep, not drifting. Awake in the quiet way winter nights make you when the cold presses against the walls, and every sound feels larger because there are so few of them. 2:17 a.m. I remember because the red digits on my phone were the only light in the room, glowing faintly against the ceiling. The heater had shut off minutes earlier. The air felt stale, unmoving, like the house was holding its breath. Then the sound came. It wasn't loud. That was the worst part. A soft, mechanical click from downstairs. Precise, familiar. The kind of sound that normally comes after someone does something. I lay still, listening, waiting for the echo of footsteps that usually followed it. They didn't come. Just silence again. Thick, careful silence. I told myself it was nothing. Houses make noises. Pipes shift. Wood contracts when the temperature drops. Everyone knows that. But this wasn't random. It happened again. Exactly 1 minute later. The same click, same distance, same length. Like the house was checking the time. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and stared at the dark doorway of my bedroom. The hall beyond it was completely black. No moonlight, no streetlight glow. Just a flat absence where the rest of the house should have been. I live alone. I was sure of that. Still, I listened for signs that would prove me right. A car passing outside. A gust of wind. Something human. Something unplanned. Instead, at 2:19 a.m., something else happened. A low sound drifted up through the floorboards. Not a voice. Not quite. More like air being pushed through a space that was never meant to carry it. Brief. Measured. Then, gone. I sat up in bed. The house settled again. But it didn't feel finished. It felt like it had reached a checkpoint. I checked my phone. No notifications. No missed calls. The battery percentage hadn't changed. The clock was still running normally. Time wasn't frozen. The world outside hadn't ended. Only the house had changed. I waited for the next sound. 2:20 a.m. Nothing. 2:21. Still nothing. The delay made it worse. It gave me room to imagine patterns where there shouldn't be any. To remember that the click I'd heard wasn't unfamiliar. It was the sound the thermostat makes when it switches modes. The sound it makes every night at the same time. Except I hadn't set it to do that anymore. I'd turned off all schedules at the start of winter. I remembered standing in the hallway, cold seeping through my socks, manually disabling them because the heater kept waking me up at night. The heater stayed silent. At 2:22 a.m., the click came again. But this time, it wasn't alone. A second sound followed it, softer, slower, like pressure being applied somewhere deep in the house. A door adjusting itself. A latch settling into place. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood, the cold floor biting into my feet. My body moved before my mind could catch up, drawn by the need to confirm something, anything. As I reached my bedroom door, I froze. From downstairs, I heard a familiar sequence of sounds begin, one after another, with gaps so even they could have been counted. The house wasn't making noise. It was progressing, and whatever it was following, it was doing it right on time. I didn't turn on any lights. I stayed where I was, one hand resting on the doorframe, listening as the house finished whatever sequence it had started. When the sounds stopped, the silence returned so smoothly it felt intentional, like a door being closed carefully instead of slammed. Everything looked normal. The heater hummed softly again, just as it always did after a cycle reset. Warm air brushed past my ankles. The familiar smell of dry heat and dust settled my nerves more than I expected. Outside, The wind pressed gently against the siding, a long, distant sigh that reminded me it was still winter, still late, still just another night. I stepped into the hallway. The floorboards didn't creak. They never did up here. The house was old, but it had its habits, and those habits were consistent. That thought helped. Consistency meant predictability. Predictability meant safety. As I walked downstairs, I did what I always did before bed. I checked the front door first. The deadbolt was locked. The chain hung loose, exactly how I'd left it earlier that evening. I placed my palm against the wood out of routine, feeling for the cold that always leaked in during winter. It felt warmer than the wall beside it. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even slow down. Old houses trapped heat strangely, especially near entryways. I'd read that somewhere. Probably. I moved into the kitchen. The clock on the microwave glowed a steady green. Power was still on. No flickering. No outages. The refrigerator hummed in its usual low, tired way. Everything sounded correct. I poured myself a glass of water, the pipes clanking softly as they filled. When I set the glass down, I noticed the sound that followed. A faint click, not from the kitchen, from deeper in the house. I waited, holding the glass near my lips. The sound didn't repeat right away, so I took a sip and leaned against the counter, listening to the normal noises return. The heater shifted again. The wind picked up outside, rattling something loose near the roof. That was when I realized something. The click hadn't echoed. Most sounds did. The hallway carried noise well. Footsteps, voices, even the TV, when I forgot to lower the volume. But that click had been contained, as if it belonged exactly where it occurred, and nowhere else. I finished my water and rinsed the glass. The sink drained slowly, the swirl comforting in its familiarity. I dried my hands, turned off the kitchen light, and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, just to be sure nothing else happened. Nothing did. I made my way through the house, checking locks the same way I always did. Back door, locked. Side window, latched. The spare room untouched, cold as it should have been. As I passed the bottom of the stairs, I felt the warmth again. It lingered there, concentrated in a small patch of air, like someone had stood there recently. I paused, then took another step, and it faded immediately, blending back into the rest of the house. Heat rises, I told myself. That's all. When I returned upstairs and slid back into bed, the quiet followed me. The kind of quiet that feels earned. I checked my phone once more before setting it down. 2:29 a.m. Right on time. The heater clicked. Exactly once. And then the house went still again. I didn't fall asleep right away. Not because I was afraid, at least. Not yet, but because my body hadn't caught up with the quiet. Winter nights do that to me. They stretch time thin. Minutes feel longer when there's nothing to fill them. The heater stayed silent. So did everything else. I lay there listening to the soft rush of blood in my ears, the faint whistle of wind slipping under the eaves. My phone rested face up on the mattress beside me, the screen dark now, but close enough that I could tap it if I wanted to know the time again. I didn't. The next sound came anyway. The same click. Not louder, not closer, exactly the same. I opened my eyes and reached for my phone. 2:31 a.m. I didn't move. I didn't even shift my weight. I just listened, counting the seconds after the click, waiting to hear if anything followed. Nothing did. The heater didn't start. No air moved through the vents. It was just the click, isolated, like a punctuation mark with no sentence attached. I told myself it was delayed. Systems lag sometimes. Old wiring. Temperature sensors misreading the room. I waited. At 2:32 a.m., it happened again. The same sound, same duration, same distance. Exactly 1 minute apart. I sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the bed too much, as if the house might notice the movement. I hadn't planned to check the time this closely, but now that I was, it was hard to stop. I watched the seconds tick over on my phone. 2 hours, 32 minutes and 40 seconds. 2 hours, 32 minutes and 41 seconds. 2 hours, 32 minutes and 42 seconds. No sound. At 2:33 a.m., the click returned. Again. A pattern formed quietly, without effort. It didn't rush itself. It didn't demand attention. It simply repeated, steady and patient. I swung my legs out of bed and stood, the floor cold beneath my feet. The hallway light stayed off. I didn't need it. I knew this house well enough to move through it in the dark. As I reached the top of the stairs, I paused and listened. Downstairs, something shifted. Not a step, not a voice, just a soft adjustment, like pressure redistributing itself through the walls. The click came again. I checked my phone. 2:34 a.m. I leaned against the banister, staring into the darkness below. From here, I could see the faint glow of the microwave clock in the kitchen, steady and unchanged. The numbers hadn't flickered. Power was still on. Everything was functioning. That was the strange part. Nothing felt broken. The house wasn't acting out. It wasn't loud or erratic. It felt organized, as if it were moving through a list it had followed many times before. At 2:35 a.m., the click echoed once more. I held my breath without realizing it, counting silently, waiting for something to break the rhythm. Nothing did. The warmth I'd felt earlier returned, faint but noticeable, pooling near the base of the stairs again. I didn't step into it this time. I stayed where I was, just outside its edge, watching the darkness as if it might shift shape. The heater remained off. The wind outside stayed constant. At 2:36 a.m., the sound repeated. Again. I wasn't scared yet, but I was listening differently now, less for surprises, more for confirmation. For proof that this was still just a house, still just systems and schedules misfiring in the cold. I checked my phone once more. 2:37 a.m. The click followed immediately, right on time. And for the first time, I wondered how long it had been doing this before I noticed. I stayed at the top of the stairs until the next minute passed. 2:38 a.m. The click arrived on time. That was enough. Not fear, just certainty. The quiet kind that settles in when guessing stops being useful. If there was a pattern, I wanted to see how far it went. I checked my phone again. The time updated smoothly. No lag, no freeze. I opened another app just to be sure. Everything worked the way it should. The clock wasn't stuck. It wasn't repeating a minute. The house was keeping up. I went downstairs slowly, counting my steps without meaning to. The warmth near the stairs lingered, then faded as I moved past it, like it had already done what it was meant to do. The thermostat was on the wall by the living room. I hadn't touched it in weeks. The screen glowed softly when I pressed the button. The temperature reading matched the room cooler than I liked, colder than earlier in the night. The mode was set to off. Below that, a smaller line of text blinked once before settling. Scheduled event. Active. I frowned, then pressed the arrow button. The schedule menu opened. It shouldn't have. Every slot was supposed to be empty. I remembered clearing them, standing right there in socks, watching the screen confirm it. Now there was one entry. 2:17 a.m. No temperature change listed. No mode switch. Just a time. I backed out of the menu. The main display returned, unchanged. The heater didn't turn on. The house stayed quiet. At 2:39 a.m., the click sounded again. It came from the same direction as before. Not the thermostat. I locked the screen and stepped away. Next, the front door. The deadbolt was still locked. The chain still loose. Nothing looked disturbed. I placed my hand against the door again, more deliberately this time. Cool, colder than before. The warmth I'd noticed earlier was gone, as if it had never been there at all. I checked the side door. Locked. Back door. Locked. Windows untouched. No signs of forced entry. No drafts where there shouldn't be any. Everything suggested I was still alone. Behind me, the click repeated. 2:40 a.m. I turned toward the sound. The hallway light switch was right there. I reached for it, then stopped. The dark felt important, like changing it might interrupt something mid-process. Instead, I listened. The house answered with a soft adjustment somewhere overhead. A vent opening, maybe. Or closing. I couldn't tell which. I looked back at the thermostat. The screen had dimmed, but before it went dark completely, the text changed. Scheduled event, completed. The time disappeared. The house settled again, as if satisfied. It didn't feel like a mistake anymore. It felt like a response. The wind picked up not long after. Not suddenly, just enough that I noticed the change in its rhythm. The long, even breaths outside the walls shortened, became sharper, more frequent. Snow tapped against the windows in soft, dry bursts, the sound dulled by the glass and the thickening air. I stood by the living room window and parted the curtain slightly. The streetlight across the road glowed faintly through the snowfall, its halo smaller than it had been earlier in the night. The ground below it had already disappeared, smoothed over into a pale, unbroken surface. Tire tracks from the evening were gone. Sound felt farther away now, the kind of quiet that comes when snow fills in all the empty spaces. I checked my phone again. The time advanced normally. The signal bars, though, had dropped to 1. I turned airplane mode on, then off. It didn't change anything. Messages still sent, but slowly, like they had to push through something dense to get out. At 2:44 a.m., the click came again. It was harder to place now. The snow outside seemed to absorb part of it, the way it absorbed everything else. The house still heard it. I did too. But it felt more private, more contained. The lights flickered once, just a blink. Not enough to reset anything. The microwave clock stayed lit. The thermostat didn't react. Power remained steady, humming quietly through the walls. I didn't move. Storms did that sometimes. The lines nearby were old. I'd lived through enough winters here to know the difference between a warning flicker and a real outage. This wasn't an outage. I thought about calling someone. Not to say anything was wrong, just to hear a voice, to place myself somewhere outside the house for a moment. But the idea felt unnecessary, overreacting. It was late. Everyone I knew would be asleep. And even if they weren't, there wasn't anything concrete to explain. The house wasn't loud. Nothing was broken. At 2:45 a.m., the click returned. The sound felt closer now, though I knew that didn't make sense. Distance hadn't changed. The layout of the house hadn't shifted. Only the way the sound reached me had. I moved back toward the stairs, listening as I went. My footsteps felt too loud against the floor, the noise hanging in the air longer than it should have. Outside, the wind covered it immediately. If someone had been there, if someone had called out, it would have gone the same way. Swallowed whole, I paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The darkness above felt heavier than before, pressed down by the storm and the silence working together. The warmth that had gathered there earlier was gone, replaced by the same cool, even temperature as the rest of the house. Everything had equalized. At 2:46 a.m., the click sounded again. I realized then how little room there was for interruption. No cars passing. No neighbors awake. No quick knock at the door. Whatever was happening, it was happening inside a house that had already been sealed off from the rest of the night. And the house seemed to know it. The hallway light came on at 2:49 a.m. Not suddenly. There was no snap of electricity, no sharp break in the dark. The glow appeared gradually, like something easing into place. A thin line of light slipped out from under the fixture first, then widened until the hallway was softly lit from end to end. I hadn't touched the switch. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at it. The light didn't flicker. It didn't buzz. It held steady, calm, and even, as if it had been waiting for the right moment. I didn't react right away. Lights turn on sometimes, power shifts, faulty wiring. I'd told myself enough reasonable things already that adding one more didn't feel strange. Still, I wanted to be sure. I took one step up the stairs, then another, stopping halfway where I could see the switch clearly. It was in the down position. Off. I reached out and flipped it up. Nothing changed. The hallway stayed lit. I flipped it down again. Still nothing. The light didn't respond at all. I stood there, my hand resting on the switch, listening to the house around me. The heater was quiet now. The wind outside pressed steadily against the walls. Snow continued to fall, soft and persistent. At 2:50 a.m., the familiar click sounded. The hallway light went out. Not instantly. It dimmed slowly, the glow thinning, retreating back toward the fixture until the dark returned exactly the way it had been before. I lowered my hand. The switch was still down. I waited. I didn't touch anything. I didn't move up or down the stairs. I just stood there, counting seconds again, feeling the quiet stretch. At 2:51 a.m., nothing happened. At 2:52, still nothing. I started to relax, just a little, telling myself that whatever it was, whatever explanation eventually made sense, it had finished. Then, at 2:53 a.m., the hallway light came back on. The same way. Slow, careful, even. I checked my phone. The time matched exactly. I flipped the switch again, more firmly this time. No response. The light stayed on, ignoring the position entirely. I stepped back, my foot finding the bottom stair without looking. The warmth returned briefly at the base of the stairs. Faint, but noticeable, like a marker I'd crossed too many times now. At 2:54 a.m., the click sounded. I didn't look away this time. The hallway light faded out once more, following the same measured retreat into darkness. The delay lingered with me longer than the light ever did, because it wasn't reacting to me. It was waiting, and whatever schedule the house was following, it didn't care whether I tried to stop it or not. I stopped moving after that. Not because I decided to, my body just settled into stillness on its own, the way it does when motion starts to feel unnecessary. I sat on the bottom stair and let the dark return fully, let the hallway above me sink back into its shape. The house went quiet. No click, no shift, no adjustment in the walls. I stayed there, breathing slowly, listening past my own thoughts. The snow outside softened everything even more, layering the silence until it felt padded, insulated from the rest of the world. When I shifted my weight, just slightly, the sound came back. A soft click. I froze again. It didn't repeat. It didn't continue. It waited until I was still, then let the quiet settle like nothing had happened. I tested it without meaning to, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Nothing. I leaned back. The click returned. Exactly once. I stayed still after that. The house felt different when I didn't move. Not warmer, not louder, just active, like systems running in the background of a machine that no longer needed input. I avoided looking toward the mirror at the end of the hallway upstairs. I knew it was there. I always passed it during the day without thinking. At night, it reflected the stairs perfectly, doubling the dark. I didn't want to see movement where there shouldn't be any, so I kept my eyes low and my breathing even. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds. Time felt flatter now, less important than position. As long as I stayed where I was, the house continued its routine. The heater clicked once, then stayed silent. A vent opened somewhere overhead, then closed again. The hallway light did nothing at all. Each sound arrived only after a pause, only after I stopped adjusting myself. I checked my phone without lifting it, the screen lighting my hands faintly. 2:58 a.m. The numbers changed normally. Nothing skipped, nothing repeated. I wondered what would happen if I stood up and walked away. If the house would follow. If the pattern would break or simply shift to accommodate me. I didn't try. The stillness felt required now, like a rule I hadn't agreed to but was following anyway. When I remained exactly where I was, the house seemed content to continue on its own. When I moved, it noticed. I stayed seated, eyes half closed, listening to the soft, procedural noises pass through the walls and floors. They came and went with a patience that made it hard to tell where one ended and the next began. The house wasn't reacting to me anymore. It was waiting for me to do something wrong. By then, the times were lining up in my head without effort. Not numbers I'd memorized, just gaps. Intervals. Empty spaces where something should happen. 2:59 passed quietly. So did 3. I noticed immediately. Not because anything happened, but because nothing did. The click that had marked nearly every minute before it was missing. The house didn't shift. The vents didn't answer. Even the low hum of electricity felt subdued, as if it had been lowered deliberately. I opened my eyes fully and checked my phone. 3 a.m. Exactly. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing. The absence felt heavier than any sound had. It stretched, uncomfortable in a way that made me aware of my breathing again, of the way my chest rose and fell too loudly in the quiet. I told myself this was good. Patterns end. Systems reset. Whatever loop I'd been hearing had finally run its course. That was all this was. 3-1 came and went. Still nothing. I shifted slightly on the stair, testing whether movement would wake the house again. It didn't. For the first time all night, I felt untethered from it, like I'd stepped out of range. Then, at 3:02 a.m., the heater kicked on upstairs. Not the usual click, a full activation. Air rushed through the vents hard enough that I felt it on my face from where I sat. The sound filled the house too quickly, too completely, as if every vent had opened at once. I stood without thinking. The moment I did, the heater shut off. The silence that followed wasn't gradual. It snapped back into place, leaving my ears ringing with the sudden lack of sound. I checked my phone again. 3:03 a.m. My heart rate slowed as I stood there, waiting for the next minute to arrive. I didn't move this time. I stayed upright, perfectly still, as if posture alone might be enough. 3-4. The click returned, louder than before, closer. It came again at 3-5, then 3-6, back in sequence, back in order, like the missed moment had been filed away instead of forgotten. I started to understand then. The house didn't lose events. It postponed them. At 3:16 a.m., the click didn't come. I felt the absence immediately, like a held breath. I looked at the phone. 3:16. I didn't want to be right about what came next. At 3:17 a.m., every door latch in the house adjusted at once. Not unlocking, not opening, just settling. A wave of small, precise sounds rippled through the walls and floors, moving from room to room with no overlap, no rush. Each one distinct, each one placed. I stood there in the dark, listening as the house corrected itself. Late, but not wrong. When the sounds finally stopped, I realized how familiar they felt. Not the noises themselves, the timing, the waiting. I stayed where I was, letting that thought surface slowly, the way memories do when they're not invited. I'd lived in this house long enough for the seasons to blur together, winters folding into each other in the same muted colors and early nights. I thought about other winters, other nights when the snow came down this hard, when the street went quiet before midnight and stayed that way until morning. Nights when I'd gone to bed early without knowing why, or woken up feeling like I'd missed something important. There had been mornings when the house felt finished, like it had already used up the night before I'd woken. I remembered standing in the kitchen once, years ago, noticing that the microwave clock was wrong by exactly 17 minutes. I'd assumed the power had flickered while I slept. I'd reset it and moved on. Another winter, I'd found the hallway light on in the morning. I knew I'd turned it off. I remember standing at the switch, annoyed at myself, thinking I must have forgotten. There were small things like that. Easy things to dismiss. Things that only ever happened when no one else was there to notice. I'd never heard them happen. I'd only seen the aftermath. That thought settled heavily now. Tonight wasn't new. It was just the first time I'd been awake for it. I checked my phone again. 3:19 a.m. The house didn't respond. It didn't need to. Whatever it had scheduled for that moment had already been done. I thought about how the sounds stopped when I moved, how they returned when I stayed still, how the house seemed most comfortable when I wasn't interfering. It hadn't been watching me. It hadn't been adjusting to me. It had been continuing through routines it had followed before, routines I'd slept through every other time. Always in winter. Always at night. Always when I was alone. I leaned back against the wall, feeling the cool surface steady my breathing. The house didn't feel hostile. It felt patient, like it had been waiting for me to remember. I pushed myself upright and moved toward the living room. Slowly, carefully. The house stayed quiet as long as I did. The window reflected the room faintly, a pale overlay of furniture against the snow-lit glass. I kept my eyes on the outside, on the blurred streetlight and the empty road beyond it. I didn't look for myself in the reflection. I didn't need to. I already knew where I was. My phone vibrated softly in my hand as the time changed again. I tilted the screen just enough to see it without waking the rest of the room. 3:21 a.m. I thought about using the camera. The idea came naturally, like checking a mirror after hearing a noise behind you, just to confirm what was already there. I didn't do it. The thought felt unnecessary. Whatever the camera showed would only tell me something I wasn't ready to name. I walked past the mirror in the hallway without lifting my head. The house responded with a soft adjustment somewhere above me. Not startled, not rushed, more like acknowledgement. I stopped near the center of the living room, right where the warmth had gathered earlier. It returned again, faint but present, as if the house remembered the spot. At 3:22 a.m., a vent opened overhead. It wasn't aimed at me. It wasn't correcting the temperature. It felt like it was marking position. I stood still, letting the air move past me. The heater shut off on its own a moment later, right on cue, leaving the room unchanged. I checked the thermostat again. The screen lit up without me touching it. No new schedule appeared. No warnings. No errors. Just the same status line it had shown earlier. Scheduled event. Completed. No time listed. I thought about how the house had reacted when I tried to interfere, how it ignored the switch, how it delayed responses until I stopped moving, how it never seemed confused by my presence, only mildly inconvenienced, like furniture being nudged out of place. At 3:23 a.m., the click returned. It came from close by this time, not behind a wall, not down the hall, from somewhere inside the room. I didn't step back. I stayed where I was, feeling the floor steady beneath my feet, feeling the house continue around me without pause or curiosity. The thought came quietly, without panic. Maybe this wasn't a house reacting to someone inside it. Maybe it was a house accounting for something it already knew how to keep, something that didn't need to be seen, something that didn't need to be asked who it was. At 3:24 a.m., the sound repeated, exactly on time, and the house carried on, treating me the way it treated the walls, the stairs, the air, as something already in place. I didn't think about leaving anymore. The idea drifted past and didn't settle. Shoes by the door, snow outside, the distance to anywhere that wasn't here. All of it felt unrelated, like details from a different night. The house had its rhythm back now. Clicks returned when they were meant to. Air moved briefly, then stopped. The lights stayed off. Nothing rushed. Nothing waited for permission. I stayed where I was and let my breathing match the pace of it. 3:25 a.m. I didn't need to check the time. I felt it arrive. There was a calm in knowing what came next, even without knowing what it would be. The uncertainty that had tightened earlier loosened, replaced by something flatter, quieter, acceptance without relief. I sat down again, this time on the living room floor, my back against the wall. The house adjusted once, just once, then continued as before. No correction needed. I thought about the rooms I'd already seen tonight, the doors I'd checked, the spaces that had responded when they were meant to. They all felt accounted for now, folded neatly into the routine. All except one, the door at the end of the hall, the one I never used. It wasn't locked. It never had been. It just stayed closed, winter after winter, because there was no reason to open it. Storage, maybe. An old room left unfinished. Something like that. I hadn't checked it earlier. The thought didn't feel urgent. It felt scheduled. 3:26 a.m. The house shifted faintly, as if preparing. Not toward the door, not away from it, just aligning. I stayed seated. I didn't look down the hall. I didn't need to. Whatever that room was part of, it had always been part of this. I'd just never been awake long enough to notice the space it occupied in the order of things. 3:27 a.m. The click came again, softer this time, almost gentle. I closed my eyes and waited for what followed, knowing it would arrive whether I watched or not. The house had never needed my attention. It only needed me to be here when the time came. The house moved again at 3:28 a.m. Not a click this time. A deeper sound, low and steady, traveling through the walls the way morning heat usually does, slow, deliberate, meant to last. Somewhere below me, something reset. A cycle I hadn't heard yet. A beginning that didn't belong tonight. I opened my eyes. The air felt different, not warmer, just ready. At the end of the hall, the door I'd never opened made a small sound. Not the door itself, something behind it, settling into place, as if it had reached the point it was always meant to reach. I didn't turn my head. The house continued, unbothered by my stillness, moving into the next part of its routine with the same patience it had shown all night. 3:29 a.m. The heater prepared itself without turning on. The lights stayed off. The silence shifted, no longer waiting. I sat there and listened, feeling the house carry the night forward, already finished with what it had needed from me. The last thought came softly, without fear or relief. The house started getting ready for morning. I didn't.